Welcome to tutorial number 6. This is another one I've been really excited about because I'm going to introduce you to some joints, specifically the hinge joint, the fixed joint, and the linear joint. These are a lot of fun, so let's jump right in. Alright, so we're jumping back into Unity here. And again, this should be somewhat familiar to you, but I have modeled some new assets in Blender that I'm going to use to explain some of these joints to you. Now, the first joint we're going to look at is the fixed joint because it's going to be the easiest one to explain. And so if we look at this tree that I've modeled, I've also put a little fruit here. And my objective is I want the players to be able to pick this fruit from the tree and have its own physics, but I want it to stick to the tree until the player grabs it. So what I'm going to use is a fixed joint to fix it to the tree. So to get started with this, I'm going to grab the fruit. It already has a rigid body, but I'm going to increase its mass to maybe 15. And then I'm going to give it a fixed joint. Now, if I want this object to be fixed to another rigid body, I can put a connected body right here, which is another rigid body. However, in this case, I don't need it attached to anything in particular, so I can just leave that blank and it'll be fixed in the air. But if I change this break force to something like 500, and I make sure the kinematic is off for the object, I can jump in and I can test it. And I can see that even though it has a rigid body and has physics, it's staying attached to the air. It's fixed right there. But with a certain amount of pressure or force from my player, I can break the fruit right off the tree. And so that's one of the features of the fixed joint, is you can make your player be able to break stuff from its fixed position. Now let me show you one more thing that the fixed joint can be used for. Right now this fruit, it's really wobbly, and I want it to stand up whenever I put it back down. So something I can do is I can come to the fruit, and I'm actually going to reduce its weight down to something like 2. And I'm going to create an empty object inside of it, and I'm going to call this weight. So this is going to be the weight of the fruit now. And I'm going to give it a rigid body with a weight of 13. So the 13 of this and the 2 of the fruit will equal the 15 it had before. And I'm going to give it a fixed joint, and I'm going to attach it to the fruit. Now this empty object, it doesn't have a collider, so the players aren't going to be able to interact with it directly, but because it has a rigid body and is attached to the fruit, it will affect where the weight of the fruit is. So I'm actually going to take this weight and I'm going to put it somewhere below the fruit, just like that. And now, let me show you what it's going to look like when I grab the fruit off of the tree. Alright, when I grab the fruit, it's just the same, but you can see it's wanting to stand up in my hands a little bit more. And when I toss it onto the ground, look, it stands right up. And that's just because this fruit, it doesn't weigh very much. There is this weight below it though, which is weighing it down, pulling the bottom of it down more than the top, forcing it to stand up a little bit like that. So using the fixed joint and invisible weights inside of an object, you can get some fun physics with the way that objects move. The next joint that I want to introduce you to is called the hinge joint, and it works really good for stuff you want to pivot. And the first example in this scene is this yellow door. I want this door to be able to be opened, okay? I'm actually going to move this to make it a little bit easier to display. I'm going to move it to right there. And I want the door to be able to be opened from this side. So I'm going to select the door, and I'm going to add a component, rigid body, give it some weight. I'm going to give it a weight of 40, sure. And then I'm going to add a component, hinge joint. And now the hinge joint, you can kind of see it right there, added this little orange arrow. That's going to be the axis that the hinge joint rotates on. And by clicking Edit Joint Angular Limits right here, you can see this red circle appears, and that's how the door is going to be rotating. And so the way this circle is right now is it's going to be rotating completely the wrong direction. And so I can change the axis of rotation right here. I don't want an X, so I'm going to put 0. And I'm going to put a 1 in the Y to see if that's what I want. That's still not what I want. So I'm going to put a 0 in the Y, a 1 in the Z. And you can see that the circle is now rotating in the way that I want it to. However, the axis is not where I want it to be able to open. So I can change the anchor of this. And I'm going to set the Y to 0, the X to 1. Nope, that's the wrong side of the door. So I'm going to set it to -1, and we're a little bit closer. And I want this axis to be right on the edge of the door. So by hovering over the X right here, I can actually scale it just little bits by dragging left and right. I'm going to put the axis to the door right there, right on the edge of the door. Now, I need to move the axis a little bit forward because the way the door hinge works is it's right on the outside of the door. It's not in the middle of it. So I'm going to change the Y by dragging right there, and I'm going to put it right on the outside of the door, just like that. I'm going to come in and fine tune it just a little bit with the numbers right there. I'm going to move that just a little bit as well. Okay, so that's right where I want my axis to be for my door. So now when I jump in and test it, this door is going to open just like I want it to. And it's rotating right on that axis that we set up for it. Now there's a lot of variables in this hinge joint. Usually I like to use the spring and then turn up the spring to maybe 10. And that means the door, it's going to close itself when I open it. And it's kind of swinging wildly right now. And so you can play with the mass of it, maybe turn it up to 100, and you can see the effect that has on your door as well. Another option that I use all the time with my hinge joints is the limits. So I can click Use Limits, and now when I go to Edit Joint Angular Limits in my scene view, we can see instead of a circle, there's this line. And I can click and I can adjust the limits of what I want this door, or of how far I want this door to be able to swing. So I'm gonna put the limit, maybe 1 right there and 1 right there. Yeah, those look like good limits. And so back in my game, I can come and I can grab my door, and it's not gonna swing all the way open now, because I have that limit in place, and it's going to close slowly behind me because of that spring I set up. So I think we have a wonderfully working door now. The next area I can use a hinge joint is if I want something to be motorized. So right here I've made what I've called a hurling cylinder. It's something I want the player to be able to grab, which is spinning, and it'll then fling them somewhere else. So right now I have it set up so my moving bits are all grouped together, and the stationary bits are all grouped together. And I'm going to grab my moving bit. It's got the convex collider just like I want. And I'm going to add a rigid body. And for this one, because I don't want it to be affected by the player, I want it to be moving the player, I'm going to set its weight really high. Maybe to something like 5,000, something that the player is not going to be able to lift. And then I'm going to add my hinge joint just like I did before. Hitting Edit Joint Angular Limits, I can see that the axis is all wrong. So I'm going to change it from X to Y, and Y is what I want this time, so it's spinning that way. And then I'm going to hit Use Motor. And on Motor, I can set the target velocity. So for now, I'm going to start my target velocity at 50. I'm going to put the force to something really high, like 100,000. That should be good enough. And now I'm going to jump into play mode. And my cylinder is spinning just like I want it to be. I can grab it and it's moving me. Because it weighs so much and the force is so high, my player's not going to be affecting it. Now, if the force was lower or if it weighed less, I'd be able to try to stop this from spinning, which that's not what I want in this situation. What I do want, however, is for it to be spinning faster. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to change it to 100. And let's see if that's enough. It's quick, but it's not enough to throw me. So I'm going to change it to 200. Let's see if that's what I want. And you can see it gets a little glitchy with your character if you start going too quick. But I think 200 might be just what I want, just enough to throw me. And if we want, we can change it from a positive rotation to a negative rotation, which will just have it spin the other way, to have a similar but different effect. We can see with the negative rotation, I'm now flinging from the bottom, which might be even better to fling my character with. Or it might be worse. There, I fell that time. The last joint that I want to introduce you to is a linear joint. And the linear joints can be used for a whole lot, and I'm going to show you one specific purpose for it. So I've modeled this piston jumper in Blender. And essentially what I want is this yellow piston to be able to bounce up and down inside of this base. And so I've modeled it, given everything its colliders, and I put a rigid body on this piston with a weight of 50, okay? Now, the linear joint is a little bit different. I don't want to put the linear joint directly on this object like I did the hinge joint and the fixed joint. What I want to do is create an empty, and I'm going to put this back inside the piston jumper. And I'm going to call this linear joint just to keep myself organized. And then I can add the component linear joint. And you can see immediately it comes up with like these pieces of paper, almost is what it looks like to me. This is the limits of the joint. And you can see if I increase the max value, it increases the joint a little bit on the maximum size. Just like that. And if I change the minimum value, I can change the minimum side of the joint, just like that. And it's showing me that right now, because the slices are going like this, that's where the object's going to be moving. I don't want it moving like that. I want it moving up and down. So this object that has the linear joint, I can just rotate it. Boom. Set it to an exact 90-degree angle. And I have my object that's now going to go up and down. For the purposes of this specific use, I'm going to change my max value to 0 because I don't want it going any higher than that, and my minimum value to -1. The max speed and acceleration aren't going to affect me right now, so I'm going to leave them alone. But I can change the spring on this because I want it to be springy. So because I've messed around with this, I already know the values that I kind of want. I'm going to put 10,000 into the maximum force and 10,000 into the maximum spring. Right now, this is an empty object with a joint that's not attached to anything, so it's not going to do anything right now. I need to make the body of this joint this piston head. So I'm going to click and drag the piston and just put it in the body just like that. And that means the piston is going to be the thing reacting to this joint. The anchor, I can leave blank because this object's not going to be moving around. If I had this on a vehicle or on something that moved, I would want to anchor this to that vehicle or to whatever is moving. And I can just leave it like this and try it out in play mode. All right, let's try it. Okay, sweet. Looks like it's working just like I want. It is a little bit too springy, like it's jittery once I jump off. And the way I'm gonna fix that is I'm gonna increase the damper to something like 250. And now it's a little less jittery when I jump off of it. You can increase it even further to something like 1,000, and it increases it even more, but it's just not as springy now. So you can find a delicate balance there however you want. I'm gonna leave mine at 250. Now just to recap what we've done this level so far, we have a springy piston, which is using a linear joint to make it springy like this. We have a door that swings on its hinges that's using a hinge joint. Oop, let me in. We have a fruit that's stuck to the tree using a fixed joint, but breaks because it has a break force. And it also has a fixed joint on a weight on the inside, which will make it stand up like that whenever I drop it. And we also have a hinge joint, which uses the motor feature to have this cylinder, which is gonna throw me to the next island. So I hope that was a good intro to joints for you. There are so many different applications for these joints that we've learned, between bridges that break with fixed joints, or giant doors that you have to pry open with the linear joints, or giant spinning obstacles that you have to avoid or jump around and grab on with the hinge joints. So I really hope you get creative with what we've learned today. That wraps up tutorial number 6. I hope it made sense and it gives you enough of an introduction into these joints where you can get on and play around with them yourself to make all your cool creations. If you get stuck working on anything that I didn't cover today, the easiest way to get answers to your question is to jump on the Human Fall Flat Discord and ask a question in the workshop support section. The next tutorial is also going to be a fun one. We're going to start looking into different object materials, and we're going to look at the layers that you can put objects in. So stay tuned.